Imagine this. You're on your honeymoon, embarking on a journey of a lifetime, filled with love, adventure, and the promise of a bright future. But in the blink of an eye, everything changes. One moment, you're laughing with your new spouse, and the next, they're gone, vanished without a trace, leaving only questions and a haunting trail of blood. This is the true story of George Smith IV, a man whose dream honeymoon turned into a chilling mystery that would consume the lives of everyone involved. What happened to George on that fateful night aboard the Brilliance of the Seas? Was it a tragic accident or something far darker? The twists in this case are unexpected, and as we peel back the layers of this heartbreaking story, the truth becomes more elusive with every turn. Stay tuned, because what you're about to hear will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about safety, trust, and the lengths some will go to cover the truth. If you want to dive deeper into stories like this, uncover the mysteries that will keep you on the edge of your seat, and join me as we explore the darkest corners of true crime. Make sure to subscribe to my channel. I post new stories every week, and you won't want to miss a single one. The day was supposed to mark the beginning of a lifetime of memories. A day of love, laughter, and new beginnings. George Smith IV and his wife, Jennifer Hagel, had just married. They had taken their vows in a beautiful ceremony in Newport, Rhode Island, surrounded by the warmth of friends and family. Their love was palpable, a bond that seemed destined for eternity. Only a few days later, they set off on their honeymoon, a dream vacation to the Mediterranean. They boarded the Brilliance of the Seas, the Royal Caribbean cruise ship, on June 29, 2005, ready to explore the pristine waters of the Aegean Sea. It was everything a newlywed couple could have wished for: a ship, a sea, and the promise of adventure. They sailed away from Barcelona, embarking on a 2-week journey that would take them to stunning destinations in Greece, Turkey, and Italy. The itinerary was the perfect start to a marriage that seemed to be filled with endless potential. As they sailed away from the bustling city of Barcelona, George and Jennifer left behind the stresses of everyday life. They were simply two young lovers lost in the beauty of the sea, the gentle sway of the ship, and the joy of being together. But little did they know that their honeymoon would take an unimaginable turn, one that would forever change their lives and the lives of everyone who knew them. July 4th, the day George and Jennifer had spent exploring Mykonos, Greece, was supposed to be filled with laughter, love, and memories of a first honeymoon together. But by the early hours of July 5th, tragedy struck, and what began as a celebration of their new life together quickly became the beginning of a nightmare. Around 2:30 a.m., George and Jennifer found themselves in the casino on the ship, joined by fellow passengers they had met during the cruise. The group shared drinks and jokes, immersed in the carefree atmosphere of a holiday far from home. But as the night wore on, the laughter grew quieter, and the alcohol flowed more freely. In the haze of drunken joy, time seemed to lose meaning. By 3:30 a.m., George and Jennifer were separated. Jennifer left the disco with Lloyd, the casino manager, while George stayed behind with their new friends, Josh Askin, and the Russian-American men, Greg, Zach, and Rusty. The hours slipped by, lost in the haze of alcohol and the blaring music of the ship's disco. It was the last time George was seen alive. The next morning, the ship's crew was alerted to something unsettling. A streak of red was noticed on the ship's canopy, directly beneath the Smiths' balcony. The sight was impossible to ignore, a chilling and inexplicable mark that would later be linked to the bloodshed of what happened just hours before. It was as if fate had written its cruel story in the only way it could, through the shocking evidence of a tragedy unfolding beneath the surface. It was clear that something terrible had occurred in the couple's cabin. But where was George? Where was the man who had, just the night before, been happily celebrating with his new bride? The cabin was a scene of confusion. The bed was rumpled, the floor scattered with items seemingly thrown in haste. A chair, placed precariously against the balcony railing, told a silent tale of someone having been near the edge. The evidence was undeniable. Something went horribly wrong in that room, but no one could tell what it was. As the hours passed, it became evident that George Smith was missing. There was no sign of him, no trace of where he had gone. The hope of a honeymoon turned into the terrifying reality of a desperate search. The crew soon realized that George's disappearance was far from a simple accident or misunderstanding. His absence had now triggered something much deeper, an investigation that would unravel a story of confusion, secrecy, and heartbreak. The questions that followed were numerous and painful. How could a young man disappear from a ship in the middle of the ocean without a trace? How could someone vanish without anyone noticing? His parents, George and Maureen Smith, were left with a gaping hole in their hearts, a hole that would never truly heal. They received the devastating news of their son's disappearance through a phone call, a call that no parent should ever have to endure. How could it be that their son, their beloved George, had just vanished into the vast expanse of the Aegean Sea? In that moment, their world came crashing down, and with it, the shattering realization that nothing would ever be the same again. They had to accept that, no matter how hard they searched, George might never return. And yet, the pain of not knowing was unbearable. Was he dead? Had he fallen overboard? Or was something more sinister at play? Was he simply lost? Or was there something far darker hidden beneath the surface of the mystery? The Smith family would be left grappling with those questions for years to come, their minds consumed by the search for answers. The heartache of not knowing what happened to their son would haunt them forever. Every family dinner, every birthday, every holiday, there would always be the painful reminder of the son they had lost. A honeymoon turned tragedy, a family left shattered, and a mystery that would remain unsolved. George Smith IV's story was only just beginning to unfold, but the heartache had already begun. The story of George Smith cannot be told without acknowledging the strength and warmth of the family he was born into. George grew up in the small town of Greenwich, Connecticut, a place where everyone knew each other, and the sense of community was palpable. The Smith family had built their lives around hard work, dedication, and the bonds they shared. But there was more to their story than just the family business and their reputation. The Smiths were a family that genuinely cared for one another, rooted in love and bound by the values that had shaped them. George's father, George Smith III, ran a successful liquor store called Costco Liquors, a fixture in Greenwich for nearly 4 decades. It was more than just a business. It was an institution that had helped define the family's identity. The store wasn't just a place to buy spirits. It was where families came to shop, where neighbors caught up, and where everyone knew the Smiths. The family's reputation was built on the trust they had cultivated over the years. They were pillars of their community, people you could rely on. George Smith was born on October 3, 1978, and from a young age, it was clear he had inherited his father's drive and work ethic. He was raised in an environment where hard work was not just expected, but celebrated. The Smiths instilled in him the value of discipline, the importance of loyalty, and the belief that success comes from dedication. George's childhood was one of comfort, but it wasn't one of excess. While the family lived well, they also knew the value of perseverance. They weren't just the owners of a liquor store. They were a family, and George was raised to understand that family meant more than anything else. He grew up helping out in the store, learning the ins and outs of business firsthand. His father was a great teacher, imparting wisdom not only about the business, but about life itself. When George graduated from Greenwich High School, he followed a path of education and hard work, enrolling in Babson College in Massachusetts. There, he studied business, honing the skills he would one day need to take over the family business. It wasn't easy for George. The pressure of excelling academically, living up to his father's expectations, and managing his personal life weighed on him. But George was driven. He wasn't one to shy away from challenges. He took pride in his studies, worked tirelessly to earn his degree, and was determined to make something of himself. After finishing his degree, George moved to Boston to work as a data analyst in the competitive field of computer data mining. It wasn't the most glamorous job, but it suited George's intellect and ambition. He spent several years in Boston, gaining invaluable work experience and developing a strong understanding of the business world. But despite his success, something was always missing. His heart was never in the bustling city of Boston. It was back home in Greenwich, where his family was, where the liquor store awaited him. In 2002, after much deliberation, George made a life-changing decision. He chose to leave his job and return to Greenwich to take over the family business. It wasn't an easy decision, but George's loyalty to his family and the business his father had worked so hard to build led him back home. With his father's guidance, George quickly adapted to running the store and overseeing its day-to-day operations. He learned the business from the ground up, proving to himself and his family that he was ready to carry on the legacy. It was during this time, in 2002, that George's life would take another turn, one that would forever alter the course of his future. At a social gathering, George met Jennifer Hagel, a beautiful and intelligent first-grade teacher from Connecticut. Jennifer had lived in the area her whole life, and like George, she understood the value of community and family. There was an immediate spark between them. It didn't take long for George and Jennifer to fall in love. Their relationship was effortless, filled with laughter and shared dreams. They complemented each other in every way, and their love only grew stronger with time. Jennifer was everything George had ever wanted. She was kind, driven, and fiercely supportive of him. She understood his need to succeed, but more importantly, she loved him for who he was. Their connection was undeniable, and before long, they were inseparable. It wasn't just about finding a partner. It was about finding someone who truly understood you, someone who could stand beside you through life's ups and downs. By 2005, George and Jennifer had been together for 3 years, and it was clear that their love was something special. They decided to marry, and their wedding was nothing short of a fairy tale. Held at the stunning Castle Hill Inn in Newport, Rhode Island, their ceremony was attended by friends and family who could see how deeply in love they were. The day was perfect, a reflection of the love and joy that filled their lives. Their honeymoon was supposed to be a continuation of that perfect moment, a celebration of their new life together. They dreamed of a relaxing cruise through the Mediterranean, where they could explore new places, share unforgettable experiences, and create memories that would last a lifetime. But what should have been the most joyous time of their lives quickly turned into a tragedy that no one could have predicted. As George and Jennifer boarded the brilliance of the seas for their honeymoon, they had no idea that their journey would soon be marked by heartbreak, confusion, and unanswered questions. What began as a beautiful start to their marriage would end in a mystery that would haunt them forever. It was supposed to be another night of celebration, another moment in a honeymoon that was destined to be filled with love, laughter, and joy. But on the evening of July 4th, 2005, everything changed. George Smith IV and Jennifer Hagel were still riding the high of their newlywed bliss, their love for each other as bright as the stars above them. Their days were spent exploring the beauty of the Mediterranean, and their nights were filled with laughter, dancing, and endless conversation. But by the time the clock struck 2:30 a.m. on July 5th, the night would take an unexpected and horrifying turn. After a day spent touring the idyllic island of Mykonos, Greece, the Smiths, along with fellow passengers they had met on board, found themselves in the casino on the ship, Brilliance of the Seas. The casino was alive with the sound of spinning roulette wheels, the clinking of poker chips, and the laughter of people trying their luck at blackjack. The atmosphere was intoxicating, not just because of the alcohol that flowed freely, but because of the excitement in the air, the joy of being at sea, and the thrill of new connections. George and Jennifer were no exception. They were excited, happy, and full of life. They had befriended Josh Skin, a fellow American traveler, and had spent the evening together, laughing and drinking as they played games. There was something infectious about their energy. For a while, they were simply like any other couple on their honeymoon, enjoying their newfound life together, oblivious to the looming danger that would soon consume them. As the hours stretched on and the clock moved past midnight, the night became a blur of flashing lights, loud music, and intoxicated chatter. The casino doors opened, and the disco beckoned. The party wasn't over. George and Jennifer, along with Josh and a few others, made their way to the ship's disco, where they continued to dance and drink. The ship was filled with people eager to celebrate, and Jennifer and George were no different. They enjoyed each other's company, sharing laughter and fun with the strangers who had become friends. But it wasn't long before things began to spiral. George, as lively as ever, was having a good time, but Jennifer wasn't as in control of her situation. The alcohol was taking its toll, and by 3:30 a.m., Jennifer was seen staggering out of the disco with Lloyd, the casino manager. They were walking closely together, chatting as they left the dance floor, while George remained behind with Josh and a few others. It was the last time Jennifer would be seen in the company of her husband, George. While Jennifer was leaving the disco with Lloyd, George stayed behind. The night was drawing to a close, but the fun wasn't quite over for him yet. The security footage would later show that George, already intoxicated, stayed in the casino with Josh and the other men they had met. They played games, laughed, and drank, continuing their revelry as the ship's passengers made their way to their rooms. It was around 2:30 a.m. that George was last seen by other passengers. After that, he seemed to disappear into the night. The early morning hours were a blur, with no one sure of where George had gone or who he had been with. By 4 a.m., security cameras would capture strange footage that raised more questions than answers. Jennifer was found wandering in the hallways, disoriented and visibly intoxicated. She had no memory of what had happened to her husband. She didn't recall leaving the disco with Lloyd, and she certainly didn't know where George was. What followed was a series of eerie and disjointed events that seemed to spiral out of control with every passing moment. Security footage and witness statements would later show that Jennifer's actions that night were, at best, confusing. She was seen leaving the disco with Lloyd, but she was also seen leaving her room later, heading in the wrong direction. Her behavior was erratic. She was escorted to her room by 2 guards after being found in the hallway, so drunk that she needed assistance. The strange thing was, Jennifer had no recollection of the events. She didn't know where George was. She didn't know how she ended up in the hallway. She didn't even know why she had gone to the spa the next morning instead of looking for her husband. There was nothing that made sense, nothing that could explain the behavior of a woman who had just married the love of her life. It was the missing piece of the puzzle that would turn everything into a nightmare. At the same time, in George and Jennifer's cabin, the situation was much darker. The room, once a symbol of their love and joy, was now a crime scene. The bed was a mess, as though a struggle had taken place. Items were scattered across the floor, and most notably, there was blood. There were traces of George's blood on the bed and the sheets, indicating that something had gone terribly wrong. And yet, George was nowhere to be found. The blood led to the balcony, where a chair was positioned strangely against the railing, suggesting that someone had been near the edge. But there was no sign of George, no sign of his body. The crew began their investigation, and as the hours passed, the evidence grew increasingly alarming. A streak of red was found beneath the Smith's balcony on the lifeboat canopy, and it was clear that something terrible had happened. George's disappearance wasn't just a matter of him getting lost or wandering off. No, something far darker had taken place, something that would soon unravel in the most chilling of ways. As the investigation deepened, the ship's crew and Turkish authorities struggled to make sense of what had happened in that cabin. Jennifer, who had been the last person to see George, became the center of attention. But with so many inconsistencies and strange behaviors, it was hard to know what to believe. George's disappearance was not just the result of a wild night on a cruise ship. It was something much more tragic, and it would take years for the truth to come to light. The disappearance of George Smith was a mystery that both shook and baffled all those involved. From his grieving family to the authorities trying desperately to piece together the events of that fateful night. As the hours passed and the uncertainty deepened, questions mounted, but answers were few and far between. What had happened to George, and why had he vanished without a trace? The investigation that followed his disappearance would become a tangled web of conflicting theories, unreliable witnesses, and chilling evidence, each piece offering more questions than answers. The Turkish police were the first to respond, boarding the brilliance of the seas to investigate what had happened. They interviewed Jennifer Hagel, George's new wife, who was found in a state of confusion and distress the morning after George's disappearance. Jennifer was disoriented and visibly intoxicated when found in the hallway, stumbling back toward her cabin. She had no recollection of events after leaving the disco with Lloyd, the casino manager. This raised immediate concerns. Why had she not searched for her husband? Why had she gone straight to the spa instead of looking for George when she woke up? Jennifer's actions were viewed with increasing suspicion. To the authorities, her behavior didn't fit that of a concerned wife who had just lost her husband. She was found wandering in a daze, and her lack of urgency in searching for George that morning made many question whether she was hiding something. But there was something else, a piece of the puzzle that would change everything. Inside cabin 9062, where George and Jennifer had stayed, the scene was alarming. The room had been torn apart, as if a struggle had taken place. Furniture was overturned, and the bed was in disarray. But perhaps the most striking evidence was the blood. Blood stains were found on the sheets, leading investigators to believe that something violent had occurred. The blood trail led to the balcony, where a chair was positioned in an odd way against the railing, suggesting someone had been standing near the edge. And yet, George was nowhere to be found. His absence was more than just unsettling, it was chilling. The blood in the cabin was the only trace left of George, but it wasn't enough to answer the question. What had happened to him? Was it an accident? Or had something far darker transpired? As investigators sifted through the evidence, a troubling theory began to emerge. Some believed that George had fallen overboard, either by accident or because someone had pushed him. But without a body, there was no way to prove either theory. The mystery deepened when investigators found a mark on the glass balcony railing, a hip impression that suggested someone had been perched on the edge of the ship, close to falling. Was this George trying to get a better view? Or was it something more sinister? As the investigation expanded, attention turned to those who had been with George the night he vanished. Jennifer, of course, was questioned about her whereabouts, but the attention soon shifted to the other passengers they had befriended, Josh Askin and the three Russian-American men, Greg, Zach, and Rusty. The four men had spent the night with George and Jennifer in the casino, drinking and socializing. But after the night's festivities, their stories seemed to grow more and more inconsistent. Jennifer's account of the night was that she and George had spent time with Josh and the others, but security footage and witness statements revealed discrepancies in her recollection. At 3:30 a.m., Jennifer was seen leaving the disco with Lloyd, while George remained behind. It seemed out of place for a newlywed to leave her husband in such a condition, especially after such a wild night. But more disturbingly, Jennifer's actions afterward seemed even more unusual. She had been found in the hallway, unable to remember how she ended up there, her disorientation raising further questions about her involvement. The men, Greg, Zach, and Rusty, were questioned by investigators about the events of the night. Their stories were suspiciously vague, and some of their statements didn't add up. Witnesses reported seeing them leaving George's cabin at 4 a.m., but their claims of what happened in the hours leading up to George's disappearance were unclear and contradictory. Greg, in particular, became a key figure in the investigation. Though he admitted to being drunk, he insisted that no harm had come to George that night. His account of the events was riddled with holes, and when questioned about whether they had ordered room service that night, Greg was unable to provide any concrete details. The Russian-American trio, who had also spent time with George, became prime suspects. It was reported that they had sneaked a bottle of absinthe aboard the ship while in Greece, an extremely potent alcoholic drink. They had been drinking heavily throughout the night, and it was suggested that George had been pressured into drinking more than he could handle. Was George's disappearance the result of a drunken accident, or was there something more sinister at play? Did the men have a motive? It was suspected that George and Jennifer had been carrying large sums of money, and there was a theory that the men may have been involved in a robbery gone wrong. Theories of theft, drunken accidents, and foul play ran wild in the absence of definitive proof. The blood in the cabin, the strange behavior of those involved, and the missing person left investigators grasping at straws. With no solid evidence, each theory seemed plausible, but none of them could be definitively proven. As the investigation progressed, things only grew more complicated. The FBI was called in to take over the case, bringing a level of authority and resources that was desperately needed. They conducted polygraph tests on Jennifer and Josh, hoping to uncover any signs of deceit. Jennifer passed her test, while Josh's results were inconclusive, adding another layer of suspicion to the already murky case. A videotape surfaced that showed the three Russian-American men making strange comments, including joking about George's disappearance and claiming they never saw him after a certain point. One remark, in particular, caught the attention of investigators. "We taught him how to paraglide without a parachute." It was an odd and chilling statement, and it seemed to suggest that George's fall from the balcony had not been an accident. But there were no clear answers, only strange words and elusive evidence. The investigation continued, but it was clear that without a body, the case would remain unsolved. The absence of George's body made it nearly impossible to determine whether his death had been an accident or a deliberate act of violence. And as the investigation dragged on, hope began to fade for the Smith family, who were left with more questions than ever before. The investigation into George Smith IV's disappearance was marked by confusion, speculation, and most of all, heartbreak. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, the Smith family was left to navigate the tragic aftermath of their son's mysterious and inexplicable vanishing. With no body, no definitive answers, and a series of questionable actions by those involved, the family faced a painful reality. George was gone, and no one seemed to have the answers they desperately needed. For the Smith family, every day was a battle. The sudden disappearance of their son, just days after he had married the love of his life, left a gaping wound that would never truly heal. The unanswered questions weighed heavily on their hearts. Had George been the victim of foul play? Had he fallen victim to a robbery gone wrong? Or had the circumstances surrounding his disappearance been nothing more than a tragic accident? The uncertainty was unbearable, and the emotional toll was immense. What made it even more difficult to bear was the fact that they felt as though the cruise company and the authorities were not doing enough to find the truth. Royal Caribbean, the cruise line where George and Jennifer had boarded their honeymoon, became a focal point of the Smith family's frustration. As the investigation unfolded, the Smiths began to feel that the cruise line was more concerned with protecting their reputation than actually finding out what had happened to George. The family was horrified to learn that the cruise line had cleaned up the couple's cabin, the potential crime scene, just hours after George had been reported missing. To them, this was an egregious violation of the investigative process. It seemed as though Royal Caribbean was trying to cover up any evidence that might have been left behind, all in the name of protecting their image. This realization only deepened the Smith family's suspicions. How could a major corporation so blatantly mishandle the situation? The Smiths feared that the cruise line's actions were part of an effort to bury the truth. But the family wasn't about to let that happen. They refused to accept that George's death could be brushed aside, and they vowed to do everything in their power to uncover the truth, no matter how long it took or how painful the process would be. Determined to get justice for their son, the Smith family took legal action against Royal Caribbean. They filed a lawsuit, accusing the cruise line of negligence, mishandling the investigation, and failing to properly safeguard their passengers. The legal battle was long and painful. The Smiths had to relive the nightmare of that fateful night with every new piece of evidence that emerged, but they pressed on, fueled by the need to find closure and hold the cruise line accountable for their actions. The lawsuit eventually led to a settlement. In 2010, Royal Caribbean agreed to pay the Smith family $1.3 million, a sum that was meant to compensate them for their emotional suffering and the loss of their son. However, this settlement did little to ease the pain. No amount of money could ever replace George. No settlement could bring back the son they had lost, or provide them with the answers they so desperately sought. The settlement also included a portion for Jennifer, who had been married to George at the time of his disappearance. The Smith family had mixed feelings about Jennifer. There were moments when they suspected her involvement, based on her erratic behavior and inconsistencies in her statements. Her lack of urgency in searching for George the morning after his disappearance had left many wondering if she knew more than she was letting on. But as the investigation continued and no concrete evidence of her involvement was found, the Smith family began to soften. They realized that Jennifer was, in many ways, a victim herself, caught up in a nightmare she couldn't have foreseen. Still, the emotional toll on Jennifer was immense. She had been left alone to carry the weight of a marriage that had barely begun, while also dealing with the profound trauma of losing her husband in such an inexplicable way. She did her best to move on with her life, eventually remarrying in 2009 and starting a family. But her past would always haunt her. The memories of that night, of the questions that lingered, would never be truly gone. Jennifer, too, had been a casualty of the tragedy, forced to navigate a future shaped by an event she had no control over. For the Smith family, the settlement, while important, did little to provide the closure they so desperately needed. The real questions, what had happened to George and who was responsible for his disappearance, remained unanswered. And with the passing of time, the hope of ever discovering the truth seemed to fade. The legal battles continued, but the pain of not knowing would never dissipate. The Smith family never gave up on their search for justice. They advocated for reforms in cruise ship safety, pushing for better procedures and regulations to protect passengers. They wanted their son's death to mean something, to ensure that no other family would have to endure the same kind of heartbreak and uncertainty they had. The case remained open for years, but despite the efforts of the Smiths and the tireless work of the FBI, the investigation ultimately stalled. Without a body, without sufficient evidence, and with so many conflicting theories, there was no clear path forward. In 2015, after nearly a decade of searching, the FBI closed the case. They officially declared George Smith IV's death an accident, a ruling that left the Smith family in anguish. To them, it felt like an injustice, an incomplete end to a story that had never been fully told. How could they accept the accidental death of their son when so many unanswered questions still lingered? The disappearance of George Smith IV didn't just affect his family and friends. It became a case that resonated with many, capturing the public's attention and stirring deep emotions across the globe. It was a story that transcended the boundaries of the cruise industry and became a poignant reminder of the vulnerabilities faced by passengers on vacation. In the years that followed, George's disappearance would spark conversations about safety, accountability, and the limits of corporate responsibility. The haunting mystery of what happened to George Smith IV would linger in the minds of many, with his case becoming a symbol of how a young man's life could be snuffed out under the most chilling and unexplained of circumstances. For many, the case raised questions about the safety measures on cruise ships, an industry known for its luxury and carefree vacations. George's story became a cautionary tale, one that highlighted the potential dangers lurking beneath the surface of these glamorous vacations. It exposed the reality that despite the abundance of security measures on board, the vastness of the sea and the isolation of these ships can create an environment where dark things can go unnoticed. News outlets, television programs, and investigative shows began covering George's story in greater detail. It was featured on popular platforms like Dateline NBC, 48 Hours, and other true crime documentaries. The case was examined from every angle, dissecting the evidence, the unanswered questions, and the strange behaviors of those involved. The story was hard to forget. Every new revelation only deepened the mystery, captivating audiences with its twists and turns. In 2010, a dramatized version of the story was produced for television. Deadly Honeymoon, a made-for-TV movie, sought to capture the tragic events surrounding George's disappearance and bring his story to an even broader audience. While it was a fictionalized account, the film succeeded in rekindling the public's interest in the case and keeping George's memory alive. Viewers watched as the mystery unfolded on screen, captivated by the suspense and drama of a young man's disappearance. For many, it was a chilling reminder of how life can change in an instant and how easy it is to be swept away in a world of uncertainty. But the cultural impact of George's disappearance went far beyond television. His case became a touchstone for debates about passenger rights and cruise ship safety. Advocates for better regulations and oversight in the cruise industry seized upon George's story to highlight the need for reform. The Smith family, in their search for justice, became vocal proponents of passenger safety, pushing for legislation that would ensure that cruise lines take greater responsibility in safeguarding their passengers. They wanted to make sure that George's death wouldn't be forgotten, and that future generations of travelers would not face the same risks. As a result, there were calls for greater transparency from the cruise industry, along with demands for more stringent protocols when it comes to missing persons on board. The Smith family's efforts helped bring attention to the need for reform in how cruise lines handle investigations into missing persons and potential crimes at sea. They advocated for the establishment of clear and enforceable standards that would protect passengers and ensure that the disappearance of someone on a cruise ship would be treated with the utmost seriousness and urgency. Despite the cultural shifts that George's case inspired, there was still no closure for his family. The public's fascination with the case, the debates it sparked, and the media coverage all served to keep the story alive in the public eye. But for the Smith family, the pain of losing George never truly subsided. The media attention and cultural conversations were not enough to heal the wound left by their son's disappearance. No amount of reform, no number of investigative documentaries could bring George back or provide the answers they had been desperately searching for all these years. In the end, George Smith IV became more than just a name in a missing persons report. He became a symbol of the many who go missing under mysterious circumstances, their stories forgotten or dismissed. His disappearance brought attention to the dangers that lurk in the shadows, even in the most seemingly secure and luxurious of environments. It highlighted the need for greater accountability and responsibility, both on the part of cruise lines and the authorities who investigate these disappearances. George's story, while tragic, has continued to serve as a reminder of the complexities of life and death. It serves as a warning to travelers to remain vigilant and aware of their surroundings, no matter how safe or secure a place may seem. It reminds us that, sometimes, things are not always as they appear, and it serves as a tribute to a young man who, on the cusp of beginning his life with his beloved wife, was tragically taken from this world far too soon. As the years have passed, and the case has faded from the headlines, the legacy of George Smith IV lives on in the efforts to reform the cruise industry, in the hearts of those who loved him, and in the memories of all those who were touched by his story. His family's fight for justice is a testament to the love they had for their son and the lengths they were willing to go to in order to find answers. And though the mystery remains unsolved, George's memory remains a beacon, a reminder that the search for the truth is worth every heartache and every tear. The tragic disappearance of George Smith IV is a case that remains haunting, not only because of the unanswered questions, but also because of the raw, unrelenting emotional toll it has taken on his family, friends, and anyone who has followed the case. His life, once full of promise and joy, was stolen in the blink of an eye, leaving behind an endless trail of uncertainty and grief. For the Smith family, the pain of losing George is something they carry with them every day. They have been left to navigate a world without him, where the very questions that should have brought closure continue to linger, unresolved. George was not just a son to them. He was a light in their lives, a young man with a bright future, full of potential and full of love. To have him taken so suddenly, and in such a mysterious way, has left an indelible scar on their hearts that no settlement, no legal victory, can ever erase. The inability to find closure has been a constant source of anguish. The questions surrounding George's disappearance, the inconsistencies in the stories, the strange actions of those involved, the possible theories of foul play, have left a void that is impossible to fill. His body has never been found, and without that piece of the puzzle, no one can say with certainty what happened that fateful night on the brilliance of the seas. Was it a tragic accident? Or was it something more sinister, a crime that will never be fully uncovered? Despite the emotional devastation, the Smith family's pursuit of justice has never wavered. They have fought for years to find the truth, not just for George, but for their own peace of mind. Their determination to seek justice, to demand accountability from the cruise line and the authorities, has been unwavering. They have refused to let George's memory be swept under the rug or forgotten. Their voices have been heard. Their fight for reform in the cruise industry has brought attention to the vulnerabilities that passengers face, and their relentless pursuit of the truth has kept George's story alive. But even as the years go by, there are no easy answers. The case remains unsolved, and the pain of not knowing what truly happened to George is still very much alive. It is the agony of uncertainty, the horror of not knowing how your loved one was taken from you, that continues to haunt the Smith family. In the end, their son's life was tragically cut short, and they are left with nothing but the memory of the man he could have become and the future that was stolen from him. The case of George Smith IV is a stark reminder of the fragility of life and how quickly everything can change. What was supposed to be a beautiful, joyous beginning to a marriage became a nightmarish descent into mystery, confusion, and grief. It also serves as a powerful lesson in the need for greater safety, transparency, and accountability in industries that impact the lives of everyday people. The cruise industry, like many others, must take responsibility for the safety of its passengers, not just for the sake of profits, but for the sake of the people who entrust their lives to these corporations. As the years pass, George's case fades from the headlines, but for the Smith family, the pain never truly goes away. They continue to search for answers, even though they know that the chance of finding their son's body and the truth behind his disappearance becomes more and more unlikely with each passing year. But in the silence of the unknown, In the absence of definitive closure, they hold on to the hope that one day, the truth will come to light. And so, the search continues. For George. For justice. For a family that will never stop fighting for the truth. What do you think really happened to George Smith for? Was it an accident? Or does something more sinister lurk beneath the surface? I'd love to hear your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Let's discuss this case and unravel the mystery together. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with friends and family who love true crime stories as much as you do. By subscribing, you'll never miss a new video, as I post fresh content every week. Join the conversation, hit that bell notification, and stay tuned for more chilling tales that need to be told.